Right. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Adriana Bankston. I'm currently the CEO and managing publisher for the Journal of Science, Policy, and Governance. And I want to welcome you all here today for our writing workshop on op-eds and policy position papers. So first, I want to provide a brief background on JSPG for those of you who may not be familiar with the journal, and we will post our website in the chat. So JSPG is an internationally recognized open access and peer-reviewed publication. We cover every corner of science and technology policy. And through the journal, we bolster research and writing credentials for early career scholars in science policy, and also encourage them to engage in policy discourse and debate. We publish policy work in a variety of formats, including op-eds, technology assessments, policy memos and analyses, white papers, book reviews, workshop proceedings, and other research articles. And we also promote the publications through our global mailing lists and events, such as workshops, webinars, and a podcast where we interview published authors. You can follow JSPG on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you want to follow us, we'll post a few of our accounts in the chat and a link to our newsletter where you can keep up to date with our future issues and events. And again, here's all the formats and the different topics that we publish on. So we're here today for this call for papers. Earlier this year, JSPG and Sigma Xi released a call for papers for op-eds and policy position papers around STEM education and workforce development, inviting students, postdocs, policy fellows, and early career researchers to re-envision STEM education and workforce development for the 21st century. The submission deadline, as you can see, is January 23rd, 2022. And today's event is part of a series leading up to the submission deadline. So if you missed our previous events, we organized a series of webinars featuring thought leaders in science policy from ARIS, Advancing Research Impact in Society, the Association of American Universities, and New America. And we discussed some of the most pressing issues in STEM education and workforce development, as well as policy changes needed in sectors such as K-12, higher education, as well as career and technical education and community colleges. So we encourage you to watch the webinar series. It has some really helpful educational content and really great ideas from thought leaders in the field about things that you can write on for your submissions to the issue. So you can find our webinar playlist for this special issue in the chat. So we encourage you to view these webinars as well, in addition to attending the workshop today. And we post all of our recordings on YouTube, including this workshop. So we encourage you to subscribe to the channel as well. So today we're here to talk about op-eds and policy position papers. We look forward to your submissions to this special issue. And we also encourage you to tweet during today's event. We'd love to hear what you're learning. And if you can tag us, as well as Sigma Xi, we can amplify that from our account. And we're using JSPG at Workforce Dev as the hashtag for today. So thank you again for joining us today. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Nicole Parker, JSPG's Director of US Outreach, to get started on the event today.
Thank you, Adriana. So with that introduction, we will move into today's event. And so we do ask that if you're not speaking, please mute during this time. In terms of what to expect, I will share the schedule in the chat for you all today. Just give me 1 second to do that. And so here you will see the run of show for day 1 and day 2 of the workshop. And so we will have a presentation on writing op-eds and policy position papers. And then we will work together in groups on an op-ed outline in breakout rooms, which we'll reintroduce with more detail later on. And then following the breakout groups, we'll have a chance to come back and recap on everything. And so if you would like to learn more about the formats that you'll be learning about today, Please follow this link here that I've placed in the chat, and you can see our submission guidelines for the call to papers. So now I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Today we have Dr. Deborah Stine, President of Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy Analysis and Education, and founder and chief instructor of the Science and Technology Policy Academy. Debbie is also a JSPG governing board member. And now I will also share a link to the governing board page so you all can see who our other governing board members are as well. Previously, Debbie was a professor of the Practice in Engineering and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon. And prior to Carnegie Mellon, she worked in the White House as the executive director of President Obama's PCAS and as a science and technology policy specialist with the Congressional Research Service. She also served as the founding director of the Merzion Fellowships Program and associate director of the Committee on Science, Engineering, and Public Policy at the National Academies. Debbie has worked as a mathematician for the Air Force, an engineer for the state of Texas, and a policy manager for the Chemical Manufacturers Association. She holds a bachelor's of Science in Mechanical and Environmental Engineering, an MBA, and a PhD focusing on science and technology policy analysis. You can follow Debbie on Twitter, and I'll place her handle in the chat as well for you all to follow her. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat for our speaker, or if you want to send them directly to me or Adriana, that's also fine. And so Debbie, thank you for taking the time to be with us today to write about effective policy position papers and op-eds. And with that, Debbie, I will turn it over to you. Oh, Debbie, you're on mute.
Yep. Yeah. So I also added my handle for the Science Technology Policy Academy. And that's because if you decide you want more, in-depth education than what I'm providing here, then that's someplace you can go. I'm going to be doing a boot camp probably over the midterm break. And so I will sort of put that up on Twitter. So it helps me in terms of audience. If and I'm sorry, I was not really listening to Nicole's instructions, but these at least are the way I like to work. So I hate speaking to black boxes, as anybody who has had anything with me before. So if you can turn on your cameras, please turn on your camera so I'm not speaking to a bunch of black boxes, because that just drives me crazy. And then the other thing is to kind of help me introduce, since I can't meet all of you, even though I would very much like to, if you could just, change your name and put your first name, put like whatever city it is you're in the world, and then put your field, and you can make that pretty general for an audience like this, like life sciences or physical sciences or engineering or whatever it is. I always hope that there's some engineers in the audience, since I myself am an engineer, but I know that the world of science technology policy is dominated by scientists. So I have lived with that for decades at this point. Okay, so I'm going to hit share here while you guys are doing that. Okay, and yeah, can everybody see that okay? Yes, thank you. I appreciate the thumbs up. Any sort of interaction makes me a happy camper. So, okay, so I thought I would first sort of describe the differences between the different products that we're talking about here. And I have, by the way, a much bigger version of this that goes into all the different kinds of policy activities, because what I find is that there's a lot of focus like on memos and things like that, but there's actually many different kinds of communication products. So this one, so just a forewarning, I'm just kind of focusing on this one between basically what I call the short op-ed, the medium op-ed, and the long op-ed, because what you're being asked to do are position pieces. So the short op-ed, which is usually somewhere between 370 and 50 words, it's conversational tone. You're kind of, talking about an issue, usually in some sort of passionate way, but it's still evidence-based. Which you'll typically see in places like the newspapers. Like I've written things for, say, the Washington Post or the Hill. The Hill is a Capitol Hill newspaper, and so forth. And I've had students who have written things for their local newspapers. So it definitely will vary. I would say typically it's around 750 words, but like I had one student, he did something in Colorado, and that newspaper, it was only 300 words. So it's relatively short. Then there's the sort of medium op-ed. The medium op-eds tend to be on the order of 2,000 to 2,500 words. So you have more space than for an op-ed, but usually they're for like a broadly interested audience. So they've already sort of, to a certain point, said, hey, like if say that there are issues of science technology or Scientific American, we already care. They're what I call the converted, right? So your audience are people who probably already believe in science and technology-based evidence. That's not necessarily true of the people who are in the kind of the short op-eds. So like when you get responses to your articles, as I get on occasion, you might get some people who are anti-science, anti-this, anti-that. You're going to be less likely for these other kinds of publications. When you get to the long op-eds, those are usually a pretty knowledgeable audience. And then you're talking, the people take the time to read something that's that long. And they're usually around 4,000 to 5,000 words. And this is because they really go, much more in depth on whatever it is that they're talking about. Now, all of these are still opinion pieces. They all, at least from our community, are evidence-based, but they're really focused on very different audiences. And so I think that's always very important to think about. Now, overall, none of them, you have to worry about things like jargon. Okay, so one thing that's important to understand is that what's jargon to you, what you think might not be jargon is really jargon to somebody else. So one of my favorite things is AGU has these cards. I went to one of their communication workshops one time, and they had the word model. Okay, now when you're talking to like people like this and you say the word model, what do you guys think of? Chat out, put something in chat, whatever. What do you think about? Any ideas here? Okay, good. Thank you. Somebody put something in chat. Yes, you think about a regression model, math models. Okay. Yes, computational models. Yes, that's what we think about. Okay. If you talked to the average person on the street, say, oh, I've been working on this model or this and that, what are they going to think about? A person. That's right. Right. Totally different things. Okay. So even within the scientific community, right, there's also challenges. So my favorite word here is the word efficiency. Okay. So the word efficiency to me as an engineer means something very different than it means to an economist, than it means to a biologist, and I imagine to a chemist or a physicist. Efficiency is one of those words that's very versatile. And even within the scientific community, it has many, many different meanings, right? So you might think, oh, I'm just saying efficiency. And, everybody knows what efficiency means, but, not necessarily, right? So that's kind of sort of a general warning, is it's really important whenever you develop whatever piece you're doing to have it read by somebody who is not an expert. If it's going to be for a newspaper or something like that, have it read by one of your relatives of some kind who have absolutely no scientific technical background. If it's something where it's, you're trying to publish in something, more like Scientific American, things like that, maybe a friend who is like in a totally different field than you are. So those are just kind of some general words of wisdom to keep in mind. So I thought I would kind of give you some ideas in terms of like what it is that real world publications look. I realize this is a contest, but still, I think it kind of helps you think about what your goal is. So for example, on issues in science technology, so this is produced by the National Academies and Arizona State, and they do things that analyze current topics, recommend actions about solving pressing problems. And you'll see here the keywords are open to anyone who can write an informed, well-reasoned, and policy-relevant article. So, and they talk about their two things, which are feature articles and perspective essays. Now, The Hill is a much more general audience. And so they're looking at things that are no longer than 750 words. And they can be on just about anything. When I have, I used to regularly submit things to The Hill, that, I would, they would actually publish them oftentimes within a week, sometimes days. But the key was I always had a news hook, something that that made it more relevant, for them to publish at that particular time. So this is Scientific American. And so Scientific Americans, they're looking in their feature articles, things that are deep dive explorations of new developments in science and technology that use empirical research to make sense of societal change and narratives propelled by character and conflict. They have to use rigorous science and clear thinking to cut through the hype, Pollyannism, and doomsaying. Avoid jargon, but tend to go deeper into processes and mechanisms of actions than most general interest magazines. So I think all this would also apply to issues as well. Now, down here is when they do opinions. And part of the reason I'm mentioning Scientific American is because I've now had students who have been able to get published in Scientific American. I think that's a really good thing because it's a more general audience than, say, issues in science and technology. And you'll see here that they will say anybody from grad students and postdocs, senior researchers, CO, and policy professionals. They come from or in a position to influence all STEM-related fields, enterprises from all parts of the world. They're looking at 700 to 800 words, so that's very similar to a newspaper op-ed, but they're flexible. It should be conversational tone, minimal jargon, as if you were at a dinner party with intelligent, educated non-scientists who are curious about what you do and what you think about. So these, I think, are good kind of general guidance because it's not just the words you say, but how you say them and the tone that you have as part of your thing. So for example, like when I teach classes, people say, okay, well, it's like you're having a conversation. And yes, so I do not believe in the traditional 50-minute lecture with somebody, at the, sort of front of the room. That's like not, oops, my tile. So I thought I would give you some examples of some of my students who have done this kind of things. Well, by the way, I like this thing here, Callie. Do you do modeling? Is a dangerous question. Yes, it is. Yeah. Okay. So unfortunately, I cannot put her op-ed up here, but maybe some of you've heard of her because she's been quite active, in different kinds of things. So she wrote a piece of that, like I said, because it's under paywall, I cannot figure out how to get it in here. But I did read it back when it was not behind a paywall, which is basically, why isn't Ohio listening to science anymore? And so it basically talked about why, it's important to make evidence, make good policy make on evidence, and why it's important to wear masks and so forth. So I just wanted to include this to show that yes, indeed, even for something like this, which is Crane's Cleveland business, which you might not think is a big deal, but really, at least I know in Pittsburgh, where I'm based, and these other things, that's where you really get most of the news these days. If you're somebody who's a professional, it's not necessarily from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette anymore because it's just not sort of in depth enough. So these business kind of publications, which are in every city, throughout the world, are really a good way to reach at people who are very active in policy and in business. So here, this is one that I wrote a number of years ago, but I thought I wanted to give it as an example of why, how you kind of add in a hook. So this was on why Congress should fund social science. So at this time, this is like 2014, there was a big campaign, as there is probably about every 5 to 7 years, that the part of NSF that funds social science should not be funded. And the social science community, in my opinion, does a terrible job of expressing why what they do is important. So in this piece, I focused on a show that was on the time that was getting a lot of publicity, which is called Cosmos. That was, sort of a revamp of something that had been done a long time ago with Neil deGrasse Tyson. And during this, he talked about the story about the Royal Society in England, and they were going to fund this, what was supposed to be groundbreaking work that was on the history of fish. But when it didn't sell, they had to withdraw the funding for Isaac Newton's mathematical principles of natural philosophy. So the issue is, okay, well, if the Royal Society, could predict the future, would they have decided that it's more, and would they have known that Isaac Newton's book would be so important that people still look at it today? And so the point that I was making in this is that even though they thought this was important, things weren't. And so you can't predict where important science and technology are going to come from. And so therefore, the reason at that time that the members of Congress were not interested in funding science was because they thought social science would not produce research in the national interest, which is part of the goals for NSF, and therefore that society should not produce it. So I then went back and quoted Neil deGrasse Tyson. He says, when I see people cherry picking science in the service of their belief systems, I think to myself, they don't really know what science is. So we have to work harder to teach that, not teaching them that they're wrong, but teaching them what science is. And when they learn that and they'll understand where they're wrong, they'll arrive at this conclusion on their own. But as I said, I think this is a pretty optimistic opinion. So the key is you'll see here, as I talked about, it begins with a story, something that's much more likely to say, hey, social science is super important. It does this and that and the other thing. Now I have other parts of this article, which I don't include here, which talked about things related to energy and how social sciences apply to energy. So I gave examples and so forth. But what I want you to get across on this is having something like that for a general audience that draws people in, that relates to something that they're thinking about today is an important thing to do. So this is an article from sort of another student. This is Evan Morton, who some of you guys might have come across. And part of the reason I put the link, but I forgot to mention this earlier, I put the link to the slide deck in the chat is because I can't put whole articles up here, but I do have the links for all the articles. So if you want to see what the articles are like, then you can click on the link and you can see it. So in this case, she's talking about removing carbon from the atmosphere must be part of climate change policy. And what I want you to notice is sort of the title. And for the title here, it's clear, what the action is. So this is carbon dioxide removal. It is a topic, by the way, I myself am currently doing a study on. And now there are these other people here that some of the people who are more senior folks, but Evan, I think, did this primarily when she was a state S&T policy fellow in New Jersey. And it's a good thing because it basically says right in the title, this is your action item. This is what I want you to do differently than you are doing today. And, you can go and kind of look through the article, but the theme is represented in the title. And titles are super important when it comes to opinion focused writing. So somebody must be intrigued enough by your title, like in my case, it was like, why should Congress fund social science research? This one is, basically saying why, that removing carbon from the atmosphere is not something that's part of our big philosophy when we're thinking about things that there's been so much focus on mitigation that this part has been neglected a bit. It's not like it's zero, but that in terms of going into policy, it's not at the level it probably should be. And so this kind of gives that aspect of it. So this is another article, again, by these are people who are just like you. So this is from Jennifer Brown. So she started working on this in one of my classes, and then she got a whole team of people here from Minnesota. So in this case, it's, why are police using a World War I era chemical weapon on civilians? So she wrote this two different ways. So she wrote it for JSPG, and you can find it there. And then she also wrote it as an opinion piece for Scientific American. And because it was in Scientific American, that she and others, she put something up on Twitter not that long ago that she's got interviews and all sorts of other things. And it all came because of George Floyd. Her, where she lived was not far from like the police station that was bombed, and the tear gas got into her room. And so she had this personal experience that led her to kind of look into this. And so it's a really fascinating piece, that we don't really think very much about in terms of thinking about tear gas. Okay, oops, sorry. Okay, so now we're getting to a moment where we're going to stop in time, and I want you guys to start thinking about what it is that you're going to be, doing, hold on, back one. Oops. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do is think about, just kind of take a piece of paper or whatever and write this down, which is, which of these things are you going to be doing? Are you going to be doing something short, something medium, or something long? So if you think about it, is it going to be like 750 words or less? Is it going to be in the 1,000 to 2,000 range? That's medium. Or is it going to be over 2,500 words? In your mind, just think a moment and say, well, what makes sense to you? So write that down first. Okay, so now I want you to go to the second point, which is, what societal problem are you trying to solve? So, take a moment and kind of write that down. So in this case, you guys are focusing on STEM education, but STEM education is a really, really big world. Okay. So what really bugs you and are you passionate about related to STEM education? And what would you like to do that's different than today? And you are all products of STEM education, involved in STEM education. So, there's something about it where you think it could be done better. So write that down. Oops. Okay. Okay, so then let's talk about your audience. Okay. Now, is your audience the general public, like it's something that could be in a newspaper? Is it somebody who is interested in STEM education, but not involved in STEM education? Or is it people who are really involved in STEM education in some way? They might be higher education administrators, they might be teachers, whatever. And then why should they care? Okay. Okay, so now we're going to the next thing, which is basically thinking, what is the problem with the current policy, what's called the status quo? Okay, so, you need to say, you need to really make clear what problem, you're trying to solve. So I'll tell you a story while you're doing this. So I was working on writing congressional testimony on behalf of a very well-known person in the S&T community. And I've written congressional testimony quite a bit, and it's usually about 5 pages because you have about 5 minutes and so forth. And I wrote it, and he changed it an awful lot. I thought, okay, I asked him, like, why did you change it? I thought it was pretty good. He said, here's the problem. The problem is, and what the pitch was, by the way, was for more funding for science and more things for STEM education. And he says, the problem is you got to convince people there's a problem first. You don't want to just dive into the recommendations, because, they think everything's fine. Everything seems to be looking well to them. The scientific community, don't we get Nobel Prizes? Isn't this a wonderful place, right? Aren't we like #1 in the world? But no, you got to convince them that there is a problem. And so where I had like introduction, and I had 3 things about our recommendations and so forth, he made it so there's basically 4 pages that were on what the problems were, and like just only 1 page on the recommendations, because he felt it was more important. And he always did his speeches by that way as well. I mean, I listened to 1 million of his speeches, and he spent almost all his time convincing people there was a problem, because he felt they would not listen unless he convinced them of that first. And this is speaking to, very senior policymakers, cabinet level secretaries, and, people who really knew their stuff. This is not general audience stuff. This is, for senior members of Congress. It was then to what was Senator Obama, and when we met with Senator Obama, it was about STEM education, by the way, because he was still, he was into the topic back then. Okay, so let's go into the next part, which is, what is your policy option proposal to respond to the challenge? Okay, what would you do differently? Okay, now we're going to go in the next pages as to how you develop that argument. So we're not going to spend too much time on this, but what you really want to make clear is, what do you want to do? What do you think should be different than it is today? And that's not necessarily the same thing as your title. Okay, so for example, like if you go back to Evan's article, and she was saying, okay, well, we should have carbon dioxide removal should be part of climate change policy. Yeah, that's the general theme. Well, I'll tell you about the 4 E's next. Yes. Yeah. So but in her in-depth thing, it would say, okay, well, what would action items be? Like there should be, as like say, as much funding for carbon dioxide removal as for mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, or whatever it is that she had. Okay. Okay. Then what you also want to think about is you want to do like some opposition research. Again, opposition research means basically is you need to understand the other side. Particularly if they're stakeholders. So let's just take something like, okay, there's not enough STEM teachers in K through 12. The reason why is they can get better salaries by working for somebody else. So the pay for STEM teachers should be higher than it is for other teachers. People have proposed this, including a famous guy who is who is a mathematician who made a lot of his money from stock trading and things like that. And he just got totally burned in New York City for making that argument. And that is because the people who, the teachers did not think that was fair. They did not think it was fair that STEM teachers should get more money than others teachers, even though he was going to provide the money. That was what his plan was. Okay, so you need to kind of think about that. And then sort of in the end here, you want to sort of summarize your proposed guidance and sort of urge whatever action it is. And we're going to go more into depth, but I just want you to kind of do that initial framing. Okay. So if you are, sort of done with that, you've gone as far as you can for this phase until like go to the next part, which is explaining the 4 E's, then just type in done. So I know that we have a good number of people who are done as opposed to people who need more time. Okay, so I see a lot of people looking at me, but I don't see any people who already said they're done. So either you should be writing or you should be writing that you're done. Yeah, and this is, I like the sort of done. It does not have to be perfect. I just want you to kind of have something in your mind first on your own. Okay. When I get to, there's about 30 of you guys. When I get to 15 dones, and we'll move on. Okay, good. I got up to 15. So we're moving on. Okay, so this is one aspect of is that I think that oftentimes, like when there's these seminars and webinars and all these other kinds of things, there's a lot of focus on the form, like all the stuff I said about jargon and things like that, right? I mean, sure, you've heard that before, but there's very little focus on the content. Like, how do you figure out what to say? And so that, to do that, you really need to do some analysis, some policy analysis. And, we're not going to go in depth into how to do policy analysis. This is the book that I recommend. It's short, easy to read. I've been using it for like decades. It's often available at university libraries where you can read an online version for free. You can read old versions. It doesn't make any difference. Okay. So if you want to just like read something about how to do policy analysis in a practical way, this is a good way to do it. I teach it based on this, but I do it kind of slightly differently. But these 8 steps are all from this book. So I've kind of had you do some of these things like already. So what we're really focusing on are these things here, which are, basically the criteria. And so the criteria are these 4 E's. So here are the 4 E's that I talk about. Okay, so this is what you need to put sort of in your mind, is that think about it from the perspective of your audience. So let's just say that you're deciding, whether or not to say get a PhD or a master's degree, or whether or not you should take this postdoc or versus getting a job, all these different things. Think about what kind of car you're going to get, whatever it is. Whenever you make a decision, these 4 E's are often an influence in your life. Okay, so the first is basically understanding what your societal goal is. Okay, so your societal goal might be to have, say, more underrepresented groups getting PhDs in STEM, because we definitely don't have enough, right? It might be having a better treatment of graduate students and postdocs, in terms of the contribution they make. It might be getting more active-based learning into K through 12 education, particularly in our less disadvantaged communities. So it could be lots of different things that we're talking about. And so our goal is to make things better. So when you're looking at effectiveness, which is one of these 4 E's, is you're looking at the degree to which the policy that you're proposing is likely to achieve the societal goal, whatever your societal goal might be. And there's multiple ways, of course, to achieve a societal goal. And so what you're trying to do is make the case that what you're proposing is the most effective, most likely to achieve that societal goal versus all the other ways of achieving that goal. And definitely more than what the status quo is, what is being done today. So that's one thing that you want to look at. Okay, the second thing is efficiency. In this case, efficiency is economic efficiency. So you want to know what policy is going to get the best bang for the buck. So you want to have some idea about how much it would cost to implement your policy. And and you need to think about that relative to the benefits. So there's some programs, let's just say there's a, I'm teaching, I'm doing a visiting professorship position right now, and I'm teaching in engineering public policy. And one student has a very, I think, interesting thing, which is on coral and, the bleaching of coral and things like that, and the stuff related to climate change. Okay, well, there's like 2 different ways, they say 2 different policies. One is to educate people, right? To say, hey, do you realize that when you're going out on the coral and you're doing this and that and the other thing, that you're killing the coral and damaging, don't do that. Okay, the other option might be to say, hey, we're going to ban all public access to coral. Okay, now both of them are going to have different degrees of effectiveness, right? And both of them are going to have very different cost, right? If it's education, you're just maybe putting signs out there, things like that. It's sort of not a big deal. If you're doing something where you're saying, oh, you're banning all access to the thing, when you're implementing it, you're probably going to have guards or something out there by the reefs. I mean, it's enforcing it is going to be a real challenge in order for it to reach that full effectiveness. Okay, so the question is, which is going to get the biggest bang for the buck? And then also understanding how much the whole thing's going to cost. Okay, because it's no good to propose a policy that's like more than the budget for the entire school district, right? Because it just is not going to happen because the money's not there. So you need to have some notion of how things cost. And I typically find that, people who are in academia only worry about effectiveness and don't worry anything about how much it costs. But that is the first thing a policymaker is going to ask you is, okay, well, how much is this going to cost? And the best way to find how much something is going to cost is to look for a parallel program where the program has been implemented someplace else, and that it becomes a model for how you design your program. Try to avoid examples in what I call the ABC problem, which is Austin, Boston, and California. And that is because everybody thinks they're different than Austin, Boston, and California, yet that is where most of our examples come from. So I do a lot of work for West Virginia. Do you really think that California policies are going to work in West Virginia as they are currently stated? I don't think so, right? So I need to find instead things from Kentucky or Tennessee or, other states that are more like West Virginia in terms of their personality. Okay, equity is who are the winners and who are the losers. There are winners and losers for every policy. So I talked about teachers. So if we offer more to pay STEM teachers higher in public schools, that means there is less money to pay non-STEM teachers. And there becomes maybe a classification system. Like STEM teachers are better than people who say work with kids with disabilities. Well, that's not really true, right? But yet that might be what occurs because of that increase in those things. So you always need to understand who the winners and the losers are. And then you need to oftentimes modify your policy to take into account the concerns of the losers. And then ease of political acceptability. And this is not just by that, I don't just mean people who are in government, but anybody who is strongly interested in the issue. And think about if there's going to be too much opposition or too little support for whatever it is. So in France, they put in a gas tax, because they were, this is about the time of the Paris Climate Treaty and all this other kind of stuff. And they literally had people walking and demonstrating in the streets in Paris, and that was because of this equity issue as part of it. And probably because they did not sort of incorporate the concerns, and that led to a lot of protest and a challenge to that policy. So you want to think about that ahead of time. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about what the 4 E's are? Okay, moving on. Oh, no, I did not mean to put this here, but this is sort of my webpage here, but I don't know how I got that there, but we're going to go to here. Okay, so this is an example. So we're not going to really have time to do this today, but I just want to give you an example of how you can take this information and create these pro-con charts. So in this case, this is a former student of mine. So that this is a policy that was in Oregon. And basically the deal is that if a stream had salmon in it, then when they did aerial spraying, pesticide spraying for agriculture, there was a 300-foot buffer. If there weren't salmon in the stream, then there's only a 30-foot buffer. And so I like this because it kind of gives, it's something people can understand, just doing it from 30 feet to 300 feet. And so you'll see here, he has the 4 E's, and he has the pros and the cons, for the policy. This is the status quo. That's the current policy. And then this is the alternative. And then these symbols here, what they mean, if it's plus, that means the pros outweigh the cons. If it's negative, it means the cons outweigh the pros. If it's a question mark, it's too unknown in terms of the information. And if it's 0, then the pros are the cons. So I have a question here. Okay, would you recommend that for questions of equity, natural scientists collaborate with social scientists to better understand the winners and losers and dynamic, and also identify how their behavior might change as a result? Okay, so that would be what I would fall in the category of, yeah, that would be nice. But the reality is it's very hard to do. At Carnegie Mellon, when I was there, there was a whole unit of people that's what they did. It was called like social decision scientists. They would try out different kinds of lighting to see if people like them and didn't like them. But to the degree that you can find a social scientist who's willing to work for you, that's always a good thing. However, a simpler way to do it is what I generally recommend is look at news articles. So, you're probably used to looking at Google Scholar and general Google, but go instead to Google News and I usually type things like oppose STEM teacher salary increase. And you'll start to see opinions other than your opinion. And because reporters will tend to do that. And then you'll see why are they objecting to whatever it is? And then you'll see, okay, and it's usually an equity issue. We don't think it's fair because of this. If you have real time to do something, the best option is to talk to real people, to go and talk to the stakeholders, talk to the teachers, or talk to whomever it is that you are trying to implement your policy. So if you have time to do that and you have access, that's your best option, is to talk to actual real people and get what they think. That's more important than a social scientist. Did that answer your question, Nadine? Yeah, okay. Anybody else on this? Do you kind of understand how the system works? Okay. Okay, so this is our last thing here. So the goal here is for you to get as far as figuring out a real title for whatever your article is going to be, and then testing it out with your compadres. So this is a collection from Issues in Science and Technology that that I just thought were pretty good, like agriculture biotechnology, overregulated and underappreciated. Congress has ruined America's beaches. Why the United States should partner with Africa to deploy advanced reactors. And let me see what this other one is. For the COVID-19 era, a U.S. States Disaster Investigation Board. So each of these either has some sort of conclusion or basically an action item in the title. And so what I want you to do is, go into these breakout groups, come up with titles, try them out, get feedback from everybody. And then you're going to come back and report those. And that will set you up for the next stage of this workshop, which is developing your outline, because you're going to have a theme. It's just like when you were in English, right? You had a theme for your essay and then 3 supporting points and all this other kind of stuff. And you might think this is crazy, but when I worked for the Congressional Research Service, which is a think tank for Congress, and at this point, I had been working in S&T policy for like 20 some years. And so I said, and this, probably not different than what you said, the 50th anniversary of Sputnik is coming up. I think we should do a paper on Sputnik and why it was important and things like that. And they said, well, that's not good enough. And I said, okay, you've got to somehow relate it to policy today. Why should Congress care about Sputnik when it was 50 years ago? And so I had to come up with a title that somehow related to it. And then I ended up doing this in-depth analysis of all these comments that have been made in Congress about space. And now space today was different than 50 years ago. And yet Sputnik was still influential as to why we were investing in space. So titles are really important, much more than you might think. Okay, so any questions before you spin out? Okay. So I think I am able to do this. So you're going to go into random rooms and we're going to give you like, say, 15 minutes so we can come back and have some discussion and listen to some of your titles. Yes.
And Debbie, before you do that, I'm just going to drop a link, a Google Doc link in the chat. So you all can kind of, have somewhere to write your titles down if you wanted to write them together in the link, or you can put it on your own individual document that you've probably been writing your ideas in. But just given the option if you wanted to see what other people were saying, since everyone won't have time to report back. So just wanted to let you all know I was doing that before we went into our groups.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, and while you're doing that, Nicole, I will answer the question which I just saw, which is, should the 4 E's be directly stated in any kind of policy piece, even a shorter op-ed? And the answer is quite possibly, but you're not, but you won't necessarily use the word, say, equity. You might use the word instead fair. And, you might not say efficiency. You might say, this policy will get the biggest bang for the buck over what we're doing now. So you would use those words, but without the jargon that I'm giving you in terms of the 4 E's. Does that work for Casey? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. We have everybody got the link here. That's a good idea actually, because that way I can sort of see this as you guys are working on them and sort of pick some out. Okay. And Nicole, I'm going to go ahead and break people up into rooms, or are you going to do that?
Oh, I can do it, or you can do it. It doesn't matter to me. You have access, right?
Yeah, I do. Yes, I'll go and do it since it'll be easiest for me to kind of do it. Automatically.
Oh, Debbie, I think there was one more. Did you see the question from Ashley? It was before Casey's question.
Oh, yeah, no, I did not see that one. Okay, can I ask, okay, how do you make the best use of an efficiency argument when the cost or social cost? Okay, so here's the deal. When you're doing cost benefit analysis, it's only social cost and social benefits. So you're definitely on the right track there, Ashley. Make sense? Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so I think I have, Where's my cursor here? I'm just trying to find, yeah, here we go. The button here. There we go. Off you go. Okay, we're all back. Or is the room still closing here?
Everyone's back.
Everyone's back. Okay, great. Okay, so while we're chatting, it is really helpful for me to kind of see all these different titles in here, and so my goal is to kind of go through them and so forth. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just put in a chat, like, did you find this exercise useful? Yes or no, you're not going to offend me. But it's always helpful because since I did something similar last year, if everybody hates it, then that means, maybe if these, if JSPG has me back, maybe I should do the same thing next year. So please let me know if it was, if this was helpful or if it was a waste of time. Okay, good news. Okay, good, perfect. Okay, so you have a lot of great titles here, and so I'm going to just kind of pick out some at random that as I kind of go through stuff. I like this, the one that just happens to be in the top, the case. So there was two things on Nigeria. And so there was one, the case for more practical STEM education, Nigeria. At least the image that brings to my mind is that, I don't know if you've ever seen this thing, but there's something, and I know this because it happens to come from Salina, Kansas. And my family were some of the original settlers in Salina, Kansas. And what they do is they have this math quiz, and it was like the math test at the time, and it was very practical. Like, how many cows do you need to graze on a piece of property that's this many acres and things like that? And it's very practical mathematics. And so that's what makes me think that, so when I think of the case for more practical STEM education in Nigeria, that makes me think about something like that, that it's that a lot of people, that is more going to, just like you think about hands-on science, this is maybe hands-on mathematics. Okay, then we have something else from Nigeria. Oh, well, let's see. And we have an interesting thing about astronomy in Nigeria, where it was show me the money, STEM education and funding in Nigeria. And that one, I really did not know quite what it meant. It was, I'd like the show me the money part, but show me the money usually means that people are making a lot of promises to you, but you're like not getting the money. So I'm not really quite sure what that one means. Okay, so, and this is a good point here. So Jenny says a lot of things are things that are similar topics. And so what I suggest is for the organizers, they might kind of look through these, and, when you guys are going to the breakout session rooms, maybe you might want to, kind of break them up into similar things. So I will, I sort of pass that on. For the person, so we have these two ones from Nigeria. Are they the same person or are they different people? Maybe you could just put that in chat, and then we'll go back to that one. I like this one here. The apprenticeship model of graduate STEM education has outgrown student needs. I think that's good because the message is very clear. There's a lot on that topic. And then you get to that issue, on that particular issue, which I worked on myself, is sort of like, okay, well, is the purpose of graduate STEM education for student needs, or is it for the needs of the enterprise? That's a very complicated issue. So I want to make sure, oh yeah, it's the same person, okay. Then we have this thing here, let me see, in room 2. I think I think that this last one here, why K through 12 should be putting a larger focus on STEM education is a bit too general. Because I think a lot of people think that there's almost too much focus on STEM education to the lack of the arts and history and other kinds of things. So somehow I think that needs to be a little bit more politically correct somehow. Then we have a lot here on science communication and kind of graduate schools. I'm sort of thinking that this would be so this makes a presumption. The first one makes a presumption that the purpose of getting, say, a PhD in STEM is science communication. But it's not clear who the communication is to. So therefore, I kind of like the second one better, where it says combating scientific misinformation by incorporating effective science communication skills and gadget curricula. It's too long, but there I understand the goal a bit better. So let me see. I think this in room 3 here, learning from the best or learning from the worst, rethinking the apprenticeship model in higher STEM education. I think you can make this shorter, learning from the best or the worst. So I like the rethinking the apprenticeship model STEM education, but the worst, I'm not really quite sure what they're the worst about. So I kind of have some questions about that. So stop shoving seam aside in elementary school seems a little bit violent. So I think I might tone that one down. I think this one on we're hiring or not, transparency and STEM workforce availability, that's pretty good. I think it could be shorting, instead of we're hiring or not is close, but I think that could use a little bit more work, or like maybe put not in capital letters, or is there really a STEM workforce shortage ? Or something like that. So the last one in this room about it, I think you have a good topic. It's just that the title is like too long. So somehow you got the right message, but it's just too long. But I think that's interesting. That's a kind of unique concept. The okay, so Miriam the librarian about building biology labs and public libraries. Just so happens that in my community, I interact with a lot in the library, and they've already taken over 3D printing and other things. And she's telling me it's quite a challenge because they just don't have the people. However, they do a lot of different things in libraries. So I think you could sort of make the case for that. Let's see here. This one here about autistic strength fill the changing employment needs and stuff, because I noticed that one early on. I think that's good. There's a lot of potential there for that one. And also this one about neurodiverse students. I think that one is pretty good. Too long, but I think that's a good topic. I did not understand. I mean, I've worked a lot on academic industry partnerships. I don't really see how it can unlock data science for at all, for, I'm not really quite sure what that means. All to me means everybody in society. And I doubt that's what that means in terms of doing things. Okay, so that's just kind of my random comments. I think I'd have to be a bit convinced that the key to solving the climate crisis could be in kindergarten, but it is a good title in terms of doing stuff. So let's go to, let's see, the person in Nigeria. If you could open your mic, and if you could tell me what your issue is here for you have these two different titles, and to me they mean two different things.
So for the first one, I was thinking more about more allocation for funding for STEM education, to allow for infrastructure to be built that would allow for more practical science education. So for example, instead of focusing on theory in biology and chemistry and physics, having more practical labs that are built to allow for students to actually engage with the material they're learning.
Okay, so I think I don't think show me the money works very well. I would do something more, give me the labs or something like that, or some variation, where you could, like, what's it? I can't remember something, but it's a good idea to do something like, about like, there's like drink more milk or whatever, these different slogans. That is a good way to come up with the title, is a variation of a advertising slogan. But I did not get that message from either of these two things, as you heard, because I thought, practical STEM education, that made you think labs. It did not mean think labs, right? So, so something that's more like, labs for all, or labs for, I don't know. But I think you need to brainstorm that one a bit more. Okay. And anybody, by the way, who has any questions, we only have like a couple of minutes left. But if you have any questions on my comments or when you want me to really look at it, I will try to do it in a speed round since we have 1 minute left. Okay, so this was from Teresa. Can I stop at I am more than who I know? Oh, you were the one who had the one
about letters of recommendations.
About letters of recommendation, yeah. Yeah, so am I getting close to where it is?
I'm group 3.
Oh yeah, this one here, this last one here, yes.
Yes.
So she was saying, can I stop at I am more than who I know? Yeah, so I think I don't think you can stop there. That's not quite enough. But you don't have to say traditional. That's kind of unnecessary, I think. You need to say something like more the challenge of letters of recommendation, or something a little bit more, the challenge, or like underrepresented groups and letters of recommendation.
Okay. Yeah.
Something like that, I think.
Yeah, okay,
Short. Like I am more than who I know, underrepresented groups and letters of recommendation.
Okay.
Or recommendation letters, something like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I think that would work, because I do think that's a good one.
Okay.
It's just you got to get the message real short. Think,
Okay.
like that's probably like no more than 5 to 7 words or something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I'm kind of at the maximum point. Is there anybody who has anything burning? Otherwise, I will leave you on to other things. Okay, great. So so thank you very much. Hopefully this was useful for you. I'll give a pitch again to sign up for my Twitter thing so that you can learn about other things that I do, because I have classes, but I also do a lot of free workshops for people. And in fact, one of the ones I'll be doing is at the NSPN meeting in, I don't know, 2 weeks or something like that. I'm doing a workshop that is on talking about communicating about issues that are controversial, like climate change, to people in the middle of the country. And I'm doing that with, so this is related to the work I've been doing in West Virginia. And then I'm doing it in partnership with Rachel Owen, who's been doing work in Missouri. And this is all, and the other thing I wanted to also kind of mention at one last thing here is that we have this, this new, so for anything that like you do, that, you know, where you're doing something for JSPG or something else where, you know, it's not published or you're doing it for a class, then we have a new publication that is a much more kind of like open publication, which is called SciTech Forefront. And so we are trying to do all sorts of different things, you know, like, you know, things like poetry and video stuff and, you know, fact sheets and other kinds of things that don't typically fit well with JSPG or Issues in Science Technology or some of those other publications I mentioned. So we just started a couple months ago. So if you could please, you know, like consider that. I'm having, like for my students, I'm having them write policy briefs, and I'm going to try to encourage as many as possible to publish them there. And that is for a general public audience. So that's something else to kind of think about. So with that, good luck for the competition, and I will see you next time.
Thank you so much, Debbie.
Sure.
I feel like that was extremely informative. And I know a lot of people really appreciated that presentation from you. So yes, like lots of tips to help you all go forward and write your op-eds or your policy position papers for submission January 23rd. Okay. So now we get to move into another group activity. And so for this portion, we would really like all of you to have your cameras on because you'll be working in larger groups. As you all noted earlier, a lot of you have a lot of common topics and common themes. And so we've created 3 breakout groups. So in these breakout rooms, each group will begin to craft an outline for an op-ed on the specific topic related to your theme. And there are 3 themes of our workshops today that all relate back to our call for papers with Sigma Xi in STEM education and workforce development. And so the goal is that within this breakout room, you'll identify your specific problem. You will figure out, you know, what the decision maker that you're addressing should address, and then come up with a solution within your op-ed outline. And so once the breakout rooms are complete, you will come back and we'll do a similar report out. And so I'm going to place in the chat an example of one of the op-eds that we've had submitted to JSPG, just so you can see what that op-ed looks like. And for this portion, we are also going to have moderators for each breakout group. So at this point, I'll introduce our moderators who will guide the discussions around specific topics within the theme for this issue. And so for the first group, we are going to be very focused on K through 12. So it'll be a STEM education in K through 12 in the STEM workforce group. And for this, we will have Madeline Wick moderating that group discussion. And so Madeline Wick is a clinical psychology doctoral student at Florida State University, and her research is on how social media use impacts mental health. The second group that you will be able to join today is focused on career, technical, and community college education for the STEM workforce. And for this group, we will have Ashley Orr moderating. And Ashley Orr is a PhD student and an NSF graduate research fellow at Carnegie Mellon University. And her research interests include poverty, labor, and urban economics. And then the last group that we have today that you all will be able to join is very focused on higher education. So your traditional universities, graduate school, and thinking about higher education for a 21st century STEM workforce. And in that group, we will have Asia Spears and Jenny Mai Fan. And so Asia Spears is a STEM education policy researcher. She is the founder of Rose Data Studio, a data literacy and storytelling consulting agency for Black female data analysts and public healthcare professionals. And then Jenny Mai Fan is a postdoctoral researcher in social, behavioral, and developmental science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she has expertise in research topic areas such as biopsychology, stress physiology, endocrinology, adolescence, mental health, education, and autism spectrum disorder. And so all of the moderators, they have documents in which they'll be able to write up all the ideas and the thoughts that you all have as you're working together to develop these outlines. There's some very specific questions within those outlines that you'll work together to address once you come up with your with the idea that you all will work on together. And you'll have about 40 to 45 minutes to do this. And so we really want these groups to be evenly distributed. And I know a lot of you have similar ideas. So we're going to allow you all to choose which group you go to for this portion. And we really encourage you, if you feel like your ideas or your interests align with more than one group, please go to the group with less people in it. Help us out a little bit with that. We don't want just 2 people in one room. And so at this point in time, I'm going to stop to see if anyone has any questions before we go to the breakout groups. And if not, I'm going to open all the rooms and you should see the ability to choose the room that you go to once I do that. Any questions? Okay, great. So I'm going to open the rooms now. And hopefully you see the option to choose. And you all can go ahead and join your groups. All right. So welcome back, everyone. We hope you had some very enjoyable conversations. And so now we're going to take a few minutes to hear from each room. We're going to have our moderators take some time to kind of just give a little report out of what you all were able to discuss and come up with. And then following that, we will close out and provide instructions for tomorrow. So I always like to go in reverse order. So for that, we'll have the higher ed group go first.
Hi, I'll speak for the higher ed group. The discussion topic that we chose was regarding childcare in higher education and how it's needed for increasing diversity in the STEM workforce. The stakeholders that were brought up include university administrators, faculty, funders, and there was some conversation about maybe, I'm trying to remember the analogy that was given about like where the strongest impact could probably start from top down. So with funders, for example, and maybe some proposals and initiatives coming from funders to universities could inspire and lead to, developing programs that would increase childcare on campus. Some of the current landscape on the problem include discussion on budgeting. So cost is a big topic. The process currently is pretty opaque. There's only few seats at the table. Not everybody gets to be at the table to have this discussion. And perhaps the table needs to be larger and more chairs open. So along with that, faculty members generally are less involved in this process. And faculty members tend to be advocates of students, and they themselves have children and can largely benefit from childcare. There were some discussions about how universities can collect data on pilot programs that are proposed to learn more about where the problems are and potential solutions to the problems. An option that another member in the group brought up was using voucher programs through universal childcare model and accessing childcare options off campus that are already available in the community. So partnering with the community at large. And then to make this process really equitable is to think from infancy to school age. So programs for parents of infants. Typically, children younger than 18 months are not included. So there's discussion on that. Preschool age and how the current infrastructure bill is implemented and how there's a way to build upon the infrastructure bill regarding universal preschool, and to also think about school age children, so parents of older children. And I think that the policy solution that was chosen that we started talking about was voucher programs could be a good starting point. We didn't have enough time to talk about other.
Oh, no worries. Typically people do run out of time, but yeah, I think that was a great idea, and thank you for sharing. It's extremely relevant right now, as you mentioned. A lot of discussion about universal pre-K and paid family leave and childcare. And so thank you for sharing. Does anyone else from the group want to mention anything before we move on to the next? Okay, great. All right, so the next.
Nicole,
Oh my, sorry. I just realized I went on mute just then. Yeah, and so the next group we'll hear from is our community college group.
Great. So I'll try to report back from the group, but feel free to add anything if I miss it. So we started out talking about, of course, some problems in this space and sort of the larger societal problems. And the idea that there's this large demand for STEM workers, that higher education should be inclusive and diverse, and that diversity is already a strength in community colleges and career and technical education. There's some secondary problems that students might not be aware of the jobs available and the skills that are necessary for those jobs, and that firms may not be aware of the skills that students develop in community college and career and technical education classrooms. In terms of stakeholders, so we're thinking about a lot. So community colleges are often centered in a local community. And so we, of course, want the buy-in of the local community, the community of focus where the jobs are, and the community members that also share the space. The community colleges themselves, so admin and teachers, the students, so K to 12 students, of course, who might eventually become students at the community college, the students that are already enrolled, and then the four-year institutions, which also are affected, given so many students. I think almost a third of students who receive four-year degrees in the U.S. Started out in a community college, and then employers finally. And so in terms of stakeholders that should act on the problem, so we had a large discussion about potential solutions, right? And so one of the ones that we landed on that we thought was sort of in the term from Professor Stine, sort of the biggest bang for the buck, really a cost-effective program, was initiating collaboration between the community colleges, between the state agencies which provide funding for the community colleges and the students, and the local employers on sort of a symposium where sort of skills needed and skills learned are discussed, and then students are matched to jobs, and teachers are sort of teachers meet with the workforce recruiters to understand what skills are needed for jobs that are coming up. And so our hope was that a state agency, like the State Department of Education, would initiate these collaborations and partnerships within the local communities. They would get buy-in from the employers that are local, and the community college admin, and then their teachers. And then the community colleges would then be responsible for getting buy-in from their students and participation there. In terms of alternative policy options, we discussed a good bit about funding given to community colleges and how that's done. And then we really landed that we really wanted to adopt this collaboration, so encouraging collaboration within these local communities. And we loved that, sort of why, we loved that it was low cost, but really high reward. in terms of this. But it would, of course, one thing that was assumed or necessary would that this effort would be sustained, right? So it couldn't be a symposium that happened once. It have to happen, every quarter or at least every term. We also love the solution because it emphasizes including all of the stakeholders and the roles. So we made the point at the top that we wanted to sort of encourage and support diversity and inclusion in STEM and in higher education. And this is a way for us to also be inclusive to the local community and the jobs and the jobs that are available. Great. I might have missed some things, so feel free, Nadine, Callie, Naisha, Ashley, to interrupt me.
Any last minute comments?
I think Ashley did a great summary.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you for moderating that group today. And so we're right at the 4:30 mark, so we're going to move on to the next group, which is K through 12.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about what we talked about in the K through 12 group. So the specific problem that we wanted to address was how to introduce students to STEAM, and specifically how to do that through experiential based learning. And then kind of a sub issue is that is, okay, when they do experiential based learning, how do we actually award credit for that kind of learning? So we had a couple of different stakeholders that we thought would be involved. So the students are obviously involved, the teachers, community partners for the schools, as well as the administration of the schools. We thought kind of who should probably be acting on the problem is the administrators, kind of putting policies in place in order to offer this experiential based learning to facilitate that process. And then also potentially the community leaders could do that. They could be able to partner with the schools for like externships, things like that, so that these students could receive experiential based learning. For the current landscape of the problem, we kind of talked a lot about how it seems like right now the administrators are really focused on high stakes testing, and they don't really focus too much on experiential learning. They don't really see that as much of a benefit quite yet. We talked about how the students are really kind of deficient in this area. This was even true pre-pandemic, but especially has gotten worse during the pandemic with the screens, that they're really not going outside. They're not really having that opportunity. And then we thought that probably the teachers as well as the community leaders would be interested in experiential learning, but they might not necessarily know how to. There's not really a system in place for them to easily do that. So we talked about a couple of different policy options. The first was kind of this issue of how to award credit for experiential learning, and specifically have some sort of a standardized way. And this might be make most sense at the state level, that the states would develop this standardized way for awarding credit. But then also maybe the schools could put in place kind of outdoor learning areas. So things like gardens, so that this outdoor or experiential learning is more easily facilitated. We talked about how there is research supporting that, when people are outside, they're kind of connected to their natural environment, their mental health is increased. And so we could kind of use this as a point of, we care about the mental health of our children and they'd be better off for this. We talked about how that might be a little bit of a problem, that potentially schools wouldn't feel like they have money to put in a garden or other kinds of outdoor learning. So we kind of were talking, outside the box, even if it rains, for example, maybe it's a crappy day, no one wants to go outside, you could put a bucket of water outside, you could collect the water, analyze the water. So kind of telling the teachers to kind of think outside the box. And so, and then within that, kind of having maybe a boot camp for the teachers to kind of really think about learning in such an experiential way. So the policy option that we decided on was that the teacher should receive training in outdoor/experiential learning, and the experiential learning should be facilitated by the school as much as possible. So putting gardens in place, etc. We only got through part of the conclusion. So for implementing the solution, of course, the training and the experiential learning and potentially grants for this training, or for grants to support kids doing work outdoors, would be really beneficial. Building these structures at the schools, and then also just taking advantage of the natural environment around the schools. And let me know if I missed anything, group one.
Anyone from group one want to add in? Sounds good. Thank you so much, Madeline, for sharing what you all talked about. And thank you all for participating today. This was really great. And it sounds like you all learned a lot from our presentation, but also had some really, really great discussion. So thank you for participating today. We hope you enjoyed today's event, and we look forward to seeing submissions from you all for our special issue. We will see you all tomorrow as we kind of walk through these outlines along with the reviewers. And you all should have all the Zoom information for tomorrow in your emails, and have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to day 2. I hope everyone's doing well today. We appreciate you coming back for day 2 of our session. And so welcome to day 2 of our STEM Education and Workforce Development Writing Workshop, organized by the Journal of Science Policy and Governance in collaboration with Sigma Xi. So today we will have the opportunity to continue our conversations that we had in the breakout groups yesterday on topics that you worked on. And you will get a chance to review your comments from our reviewers. And so I would ask, in order to reduce background noise, that if you are not speaking, can you please just mute your sound? And then we will get into it. So the first thing that I would like to do is have our reviewers introduce themselves. So Jenny, if you could just introduce yourself with your name, your current position, and your background, and that would be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Mai-Fan. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Waisman Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have a background in stress physiology and social neuroendocrinology, and currently studying adolescent development and mental and sexual health in autistic adolescents. I also have served over 6 years in public service on state and federal advisory committees concerning autism research, services, community support, and education. Glad to be back on day 2.
Thank you, Jenny. And Christine, could you please introduce yourself? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Christine, and I am currently an Albert Einstein Fellow in Congress. I'm in the Office of Representative Grijalva. I've been an educator for about 15 years. I taught high school earth science, astronomy, chemistry, and engineering for 13 of that. And last year in the pandemic, taught middle school. I also teach college astronomy, and I teach teachers. I have a background in education and also in science and astronomy. And so I kind of walk both worlds there. And I'm currently a doctoral student at University of California at Santa Barbara. But we like this area, so I may be moving to Maryland. Not physically moving, doctorate moving, to finish up there. And that's in STEM education. And my research is centered on STEM and social justice, in particular, astronomy and earth science as a bridge to equity. And I'm currently working in policy, but that is definitely not my background. But yeah, longtime educator.
Thank you, Christine. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And what I'm going to do, we will be in what we're going to do is we're going to combine the K through 12 and the community college groups from yesterday together. And you all will be working with Jenny. And then we'll have our second group, the higher ed group, with Christine. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up the breakout rooms, and I will let you all choose your room based on where you were yesterday. So just give me a couple of seconds to do that. And then in addition to that, your reviewers have access to these documents. So they will be pulling up your outlines from yesterday and walking through them. Yes, Natalie, thank you for your comment. We will be sending out the documents to everyone who participated via email once this wraps up. So you will be able to access these documents after everything is complete, and you'll be able to like walk through what you and your group worked on. So I'm going to open the groups now. Does anyone have any questions before I open the group? I know a couple of people who are here today weren't here yesterday. I would encourage you to enter the group where your interests lie. So if you're very interested in K through 12 or in community college and technical education areas, I would encourage you to go to that group to see what they are discussing. But if you're very interested in higher education, typical four-year university, graduate school, so on and so forth, I encourage you to go to that group if you were not able to participate yesterday. And so with that, I'm going to open up the groups. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all gained some insightful knowledge and were able to have some really good discussions about the outlines that you all prepared yesterday. And so at this time, we're going to take about 5 to 10 minutes for each group to kind of just share with the full group the feedback you all learned or any insights that you think are worthy to share with everyone that really will help frame your future op-eds in your policy position papers. So I know we had our moderators in each group, but at this time I really do open it to anyone who wants to share about the feedback that they learned in their group that they think could be really helpful for everyone else to hear. So not to call on anyone, but does anybody want to step up and say anything first?
Well, I just want to say that I learned that stating the problem is really important, as well as the stakeholders and who are we going to address this to. So, and it takes time, right, to decide and think about that. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Usually people won't read what you have to write if they don't know what's wrong first. And that's really a huge part of writing a good policy paper. Anyone else want to share what they talked about in their group? Did our moderators have anything that they feel like they would like to add, Jenny or Christine?
So my group was, we just had some really rich discussion. It was really great to see the ideas and the collaboration amongst the group, and seeing it come back to, what is the goal, and also, the process of how big things can be, and having someone say, okay, but really maybe we should bring this back and narrow the focus, and the evolution of that, and just seeing how involved a policy, the idea of taking an idea and thinking about how far reaching that policy can be, and coming back to what do we want those results to be? What do we want that outcome to be? And how can this be realistic? And then just, I really appreciated the sharing of everyone's perspective and their own lives on that. It was a really good convo. I know I learned a lot.
Great, yeah, and I want to emphasize one of the points you made about something possibly being too broad to be addressed. I think that's something that's really important for everyone to understand as you walk away to prepare to write your policy op-eds or position papers. Typically, for a lot of things to be actually enacted, you really want to have a specific focus, because if something is too broad, it may be too hard to get, when you think congressionally, it might be too hard to get support, or it might cost too much depending on what you're trying to propose. So really thinking about having a hook and having it be narrow enough where it can reach a specific need and people can understand why it absolutely has to be done. Jenny, did you have anything to share from your group?
It was in a way serendipitous that the K through 12 and community college group were placed into one group. We ended actually the meeting with the commonality in the focus on experiential learning. within the K through 12 group in community college. And kind of similar to the higher ed conversation that I was a part of yesterday, there's a larger problem to think about and work through. I thought it was good that everyone really talked through the process and the layers of each of the problems and how coming up with a solution can be as simple as where's the starting point, who to target as the first set of stakeholders, and then maybe coming up with a plan for other stakeholders who could be involved in the process. So conversations, and we use the word digression in the group. And I think that's needed when talking about the problem and then talking about solutions to the problem, when it's multiple players involved and not just, as simple as Sam, I'm going to steal your analogy, where putting a band-aid on a much larger problem isn't going to fix the problem.
Yeah, great. No, thank you for sharing. That was really helpful. Did anybody else want to share about what they talked about in their group? No pressure. Okay, great. Well, I'm glad you all really enjoyed your sessions and were able to have very fruitful discussions today. Thank you for coming back for the second day. We really appreciate it. To answer the question, yes, we will be sending out these documents to everyone who attended these past 2 days. So, give us a couple of days to get everything out, but we're going to not only send out those documents, but we will also post this event to YouTube. So you'll be able to rewatch the presentation from Dr. Stine and also recap some of this discussion that we had today. Before we close out, I'm just going to put our links back in the chat where you can follow us and also where you can just find out a lot about our events. We post a lot of things on Twitter and LinkedIn. We also have a newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks in which a lot of these events and links are posted. Also, this writing workshop was being held to prepare for our call to submissions of our upcoming issue, with Sigma Xi. That's going to be very focused on STEM education and workforce. We encourage all of you to use your ideas that I know you all have and submit to that issue. And the deadline is January 23rd, 2022. So that'll all be here before you know it. And with that, thank you all for coming. And I hope you all have, not for later, exactly. So we have, you'll see on our, if you go online, you will see that our submission is for people who are in their early career stages. So that means if you are a fellow, or if you are currently in your PhD or not too far removed from your PhD, you are eligible to write and submit to the journal. So if you do go to our website, you'll see the specific submission deadlines. And as long as you fall in with one of the criteria, you can submit. Yes, thank you for your question. Undergraduate level is eligible. Yes, absolutely. Are there any other questions about submissions while we're all here?
So I'm kind of like just curious about this. I got my PhD a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of like in the nebulous area? I mean, can I still submit to this?
Yeah, and to also say if you don't fall in the criteria, it doesn't mean that you can't submit. It just means you can't be the first author. So if you connected with someone at this workshop, perhaps that does qualify to submit, and you're interested in really working on that piece with that person, you are absolutely able to be an author on that. You just would not be recognized as the very first author. But yes, a few years out from your PhD should qualify, so no issues there. Pre-tenure, it would depend on how far out you are from your PhD and postdoctoral training. But all of that stuff is on our website. And what I'll do is in the wrap-up email, I'll include the specific link to our submission guidelines so everyone can review that. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you all. It was great seeing you all today, and I'm glad you enjoyed the conversation. And please enjoy the rest of your Sunday.